Good afternoon, Rich Nass with Open Systems Media here for my weekly chat with Ray Zinn. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, Rich. It's nice and sunny here right now.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so let's talk about something that has to do with big company versus small company. And in this case, it's actually very big company. Where I'm going with this has to do with something that design engineers would be very interested in, and that's standards. Standards are often defined by larger vendors without going through the process that the smaller vendors would have to go through to get a standard passed through. And I'm referring to these standards bodies. Without mentioning any specific company names, and we all know who they are, they say, this is going to be a standard, so you need to design to it. It's often at their own advantage when they do that, but because of the weight that they have to throw around, these standards actually do become standards. Is that a fair thing? Is that not a fair thing? Is that a good thing? Is that not a good thing? And I'm guessing that you found yourself in this boat when you were running Micrel. What do you think about that one?
Well, of course, when I was running Micrel, I didn't like it because it just so happened that one large company actually had gotten in with a major customer. Because if you look at each industry, there are certain companies within an industry that lead out, that actually that develop these standards, whether it be in automotive or whether it be in computing or communications. There's always somebody that is the one that everybody else follows once they set the standard. And unfortunately, that gives the larger companies that's in bed with that particular customer, and they all know who those are, the ones that everybody else tends to follow. In automotive, for example, it is BMW, and so if you can get in with BMW and establish that relationship early on, you can establish a standard, even though it's not as you would an IEEE standard or an industry standard, and that causes some problems, because if your company is following the industry standard, then yet the major customer decides to push the other companies, the one they've been working with, standard, then you have to develop two of them. You got to develop both your the one that the IEEE has, and then plus the one that the company that got in bed early has established. And so there ends up being two standards, which unfortunately is not a good thing.
Is there anything to be done about it?
Don't know. That's the thing. It's not highly regulated, as we know. And so unless there's some governmental regulatory oversight, they can get away with it. So it's not unusual to actually have multiple standards, which causes compatibility problems, by the way, when this occurs. So I don't think it's fair, but that's the way the world is.
Have you ever found yourself on the other side of that equation, being the one who's actually creating the standard and saying to other people, this is it, deal with it?
No, I never did. What I did was, we decided early on that we were going to involve ourselves in the standards that the industry standards set out, whether it be IEEE or whoever. So we went that route. We have developed our own standards for a particular technology. In fact, we call it MicroNet, was one of the standards that we put in play. But that wasn't necessarily, that was more or less to have our compatibility issues that we needed with our transceiver system. Zigbee's another one as an example of one that wasn't necessarily an industry, an IEEE one. Yes, I've done that, but it wasn't necessarily like an automotive or some other kind of standard. It was one that that we put in place to just the compatibility of our own system. So, and maybe the big companies will say, well, that's all we're doing too. So, who knows? So I guess I did. I guess in truth, I have established my own standards at times.
But in the space you were in, I could see you butting heads with the TIs or the analog devices of the world, who would be creating those types of standards rather than the OEMs.
Right, that's true. You're competing against the companies that are actually building the IC or the product as opposed to the OEM. The OEM, of course, can force you to use the TI or analog device standard if they end up wanting to choose that particular company's product because they do on multiple sources. So they'll say, okay, well, if you want to be a game player or playing this game, you have to adopt the TI or the analog devices standard. So that's the way it goes, and that's I don't know how that's going to change without some kind of a regulatory oversight.
But that must put you in a strange position, sort of validating your competitors' parts.
Well, that's another issue. They're required, if in fact the customer adopts their particular method, they're required then to give some information that would allow you then to be compatible with that standard. So that's also a danger for them, because now they have to release certain information that otherwise they can remain proprietary, like we did with Micronet. We didn't have to disclose that because the customers weren't requiring it. But if the customer says that, okay, to adopt your particular methodology as a standard, you're going to have to give out this information to your competitors so that they can then be compatible with your particular design.
But even when you could do a better job than they've done, you still have to conform to what they've done.
Exactly, and this has happened to us a number of times. I mean, not more than once. I mean, many times, and that's sometimes that's unintentional too. I mean, the customer develops a product before the industry standards come out, and therefore, they put all that work and effort into it, and they don't want to redesign if the industry comes out with a different standard. So it may be unintentional that they've developed this particular product standard before the industry standard comes out.
Right. Okay. Interesting stuff. For people who are designing products and looking to integrate those products.
Well, and that's part of the game. I mean, it's sometimes it's unintentional and sometimes it's totally intentional. So, but if you're a standard, you cannot. If you're developing a product that is a standard, you can't deny anybody else access to that standard, because it won't be a standard then, right? I mean, if you develop a proprietary technology and you don't want it to be a standard, then you can't call it a standard. So that's the good news, bad news part of it.
Very good. Okay. Well, I think that'll do it for this week. Thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you, Rich.
That was Ray Zinn. He's the longtime former CEO of Micrel, and I'm Rich Nass with Open Systems Media. Have a great day.
Well, thanks, Rich.